Hello, my name is Yoon and I'm a founder and a head coach of Uplift Crew. As part of our efforts to raise 2K for a Title I school, we've been interviewing educators from different sectors, and this is our first interviewee. Thank you for joining us. Could you briefly introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Amy Yoon. I'm currently a first grade teacher at an elementary school in East LA. I've been
That's
teaching for, I would say, in a public school setting, an elementary school setting, since 2013 in the United States. So it's been about 12 years.
and could you talk a little bit about your experience with Title I schools?
So, when I first started teaching or getting involved in an elementary setting, that was back in 2013, and that was a charter school in Florida. That school was definitely a Title I school because we had more than, I would say, about 70% of the students who were low income students. So that was considered to be a Title I school. Then, unfortunately, the school closed down, so I moved to a regular public elementary school, and that school also was a Title I school because more than, I believe at that time, 60% of the students were low income as well. And then well, 8 years ago, I moved to California, and the current school that I'm at right now in Monterey Park, California, is also a Title I public school. So I've
So
had, I guess, all of my 12, 13 years of teaching experience has been in a Title I school.
that's amazing. But I believe as we continue this interview, people will ask this question, what is a Title I school? So if you could briefly introduce about the concept of Title I school.
So in order to qualify as a Title I school, you have to have more than 40% of the student population be designated as or considered as low income. So that's like the number one criteria. And once you have students that are more than 40% into the entire population low income, then you start receiving federal funding. And that's through what we would call Part A of the Elementary and Secondary School Act. And the federal government will fund the school so that the students don't have that learning gap between maybe a non-Title I school, let's say a school where the students are more well off. So we really want to close that gap. And the way that is done is through federal funding. The school is able to hire more resources, more human resources like aides or tutors, or even in the special education part, they're able to hire outside help, outside resources to actually make sure that our students are receiving an equal opportunity and learning. And that's the way that the US government works. They designate the Title I schools so that that gap between high income and low income students can be lessened. So Title I schools, believe it or not, 2/3 of the public schools and charter schools combined in the United States of America are Title I schools. So if you think about it that way, quite a bit of schools are actually Title I schools. And that's probably why, even though I moved states, all of my schools were and have been Title I schools.
So now I think we're getting the hang of what Title I schools are. But in the real life setting, is there anything special about a Title I school? Or is there a noticeable difference between other public schools in general and Title I schools?
Absolutely. So basically, the division is between whether you're a Title I school or a non-Title I school. So a Title I school mostly would be like a charter school or a public school where it's pretty much open to the general public. And a non-Title I school mostly be like private schools where the students are, well, I mean, the parents are well off and they're able to fund their child's education. So the difference that we see in a Title I school is that, number one, a lot of parent engagement opportunities. Because unfortunately, if you are low income, and I do see that quite a bit, parents are busy working. So they don't really have that many opportunities to be involved in their students or in their child's learning. And because of that, and as we all know, parent engagement, parent involvement, parent support is so important in a child's educational journey. But if we don't have that, and at no fault of their own, it's because they're working, they're trying to make a living. That part is always a very difficult part, and we don't force parents to say, "Hey, you really need to do this. You're not doing it." We understand that. So we basically try to provide as many parent engagement opportunities at after school is done. So it's like more in the evening time. So Title I school, you won't see a lot of these parent engagement happening during the daytime because we know that parents won't be able to make it. So if you look at a Title I school, you're going to have a lot of events. Let's say, for example, a mathnasium event, or you might have, for example, a STEM event. You might have a spelling bee. You might have maybe a drama performance more towards the end where you can actually get more parents involved. So that's one thing that we really, really do encourage. Another thing is that you're going to see school-wide programs. So with the federal funding money, it's quite a bit. Schools are able to sometimes basically buy these curriculums, these different types of programs, and they can basically base it all over the school. So every student in the school, whether you really are a low income or not, are able to have access to those programs. Another thing is targeted programs, where maybe this program that we end up buying with the federal funds is just for that specific group. So in that case, it could be for students who need some more help with reading. In that case, they might buy a specific reading program that would help that specific group that maybe is struggling with reading. That's another thing. Another thing that we see is once you receive federal funding, you're accounted for receiving that. You can't just take it. Now you really got to show the government that you're really making changes, right? You're closing the gap with it. So what happens is state testing definitely has to happen. It's mandatory because basically the government will use that data, and that would be basically accounted for. So to see how much progress did your school make? So did your school go from, let's say, a D ranking school to a B ranking school next year, right? Or did we go backwards, right? So basically, were those funds that you received justifiable? So you're going to see a lot more data coming through. So teachers are going to have to administer a lot more statewide exams and input a lot more scores into a database, so that all of that data will go and they'll basically go into and flow into the federal, or if not the state educational department's database, and they take a look at it and they basically try to see how much improvement has been made throughout the year. And based on that, they do take a very close look to see if those funds were utilized correctly. Another thing is attendance too. So that's why first thing that teachers have to do when we get to school and all the students are in class, number one thing is we have to do attendance. That's probably the most important thing, because if it's not done by a certain time, we get audited. And when we get audited and that's not done by a certain time, they look for why it's not done, because attendance is also a very important part of federal funding as well. A non-Title I school, they don't really have to worry about that, right? Because they don't have the federal government accounting them for, how much, improvement do the students make. So there's less of that type of stress that the teachers receive. However, because they don't receive a substantial amount of federal funding, you're going to have teachers, if not, the PTA or staff members, trying to do fundraising throughout the year. So that's a different way that they have to make up for the resources for the school. Another thing, since we're talking about resources, in a Title I school, um, you have a lot of access to different type of resources. Let's say I need a math manipulative. Then I can basically, I get a stipend. I get let's say a $300 stipend. Then within that range, I can buy certain things that will help the students in my class, if not a targeted group, if not the general students in my class. But it does take some time to get approved, especially if it's a bigger project. So when it comes to spending money, they tend to really scrutinize it a little bit more. But besides that, in terms of having access to more resources, Title I schools tend to have more than non-Title I schools because the federal funded money is utilized that way to be spent on resources and materials for students.
So you mentioned some extra support for students with the federal funding money for Title I in Title I schools. So on top of teachers' efforts, is there anything student experiences? For example, they spend more time in the school environment, or they get to have different classes compared to non-Title I schools.
So, for example, what they would do for students is that they may purchase a certain app. Let's say for English language learners, they may purchase a certain type of math app, and that or I mean, there are a ton of math apps out there, a ton of reading apps out there. So basically, those type of things will be purchased, and they will be made available for the students to use during technology time. So that's where a lot of it goes. Some of it goes to field trips. Students are we want to send the kids outside. We want to go outside of the campus sometimes, and funds from the Title I will come and we will use it that way. If we were to, for example, do information sessions for the parents, right? Because we want to do parent engagement sessions. In that case, we will use Title I money, let's say, for example, to print out flyers, to maybe create some type of flyer booklet or those type of brochures. All of that will come from Title I money. In terms of after school, believe it or not so much, because a lot of the students have to go to different after school programs. So we don't see that much. And also, it's also, believe it or not, very tricky to keep the students within the school after school hours. It does require quite a bit of personnel to actually watch them. So we don't do a lot. Our school in particular, we don't do a lot of after school with Title I funding, but we do a lot of parent engagement, a lot of student engagement where the parents are involved. Let's say in the evening around like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. But most of the Title I funding for our students would go into buying those apps, or in some cases, I don't know if let's say you're aware of this, but iReady program is basically a standardized testing program that we use now. And LAUSD uses it now. My school district has been using it for a very long time. That's also available for our students. Even they can use it at home, and there's resources in there that they can print out. All of that can be used at home as well. We have the EPIC reading program, which is an online book library for the students. That's also purchased as well for the students, and that can be used at home as well. So we don't necessarily hire people for after school to sit with them because it's a little bit of tricky. There is some liability issues, to be honest with you. Once there isn't, let's say, the right amount of people on campus to support the students. So most of it goes towards either apps or something online to support our students.
So you mentioned a little bit about like some challenges or hardships. Could you elaborate or add a little bit more to that about maybe the little bit of challenges or hardships you had when teaching in a Title I school setting?
Absolutely. I think the first thing I mentioned was about parent engagement. So one thing that definitely is quite prevalent is that we're going to see students who are motivated and they are willing to learn, but they may not be getting the support that they need. And in many cases, they may not be able to afford to go to after school. They may not meet that criteria to go to, let's say, a paid, like a free after school program within the school. So in that case, they may have their grandparents pick them up. And where I live right now, we have a lot of English language learners. So of course, the grandparents may not be fluent in English. So when it comes to helping out with homework, projects, and even like maybe getting the emails out, messages out, and being able to read that on time, and maybe being able to send something in on time, is very tricky. And of course, as teachers, we try our best, English, Spanish, if not Chinese, in that type of language to make sure that they are aware of it. But because of the time constraints that they have, they may work like from 10 to 4 a.m. in the morning, When you come home, you're not going to be opening up an email. So in that case, sometimes it's difficult when it comes to reaching parents. And also from a student's point of view, they also know that their parents are really working really hard, right? And for them to basically expect that their parents can do everything for them, that's also something that is very difficult when you're a little kid. And we see a lot of that. So, as a teacher, the best that we can do, best that I do, is I basically try to accommodate the student as much as I can. So let's say if I have a general set of, let's say, work that needs to be done, maybe if somebody after, let's say, the first trimester, I can definitely tell that there is a lot going on at home. In that case, I might pare down the amount of work. I might try a different strategy. I may have to meet with the parent in person, rather than through email, because that might not be something that's very easy for them to do. Also interpreting data, how the child is performing or where they might be, those type of things. So it does take a little bit extra, but it's just part of the job itself to make sure that all students and parents receive an equal opportunity in terms of receiving education in a public setting.
So diving a little more into students' progress. So on top of the state testing results you mentioned and the data you have to go through, how do you measure students' progress, like academic progress, or with those measures you have, do you think it's it's like 100% personalized, or is there any little bit of struggle you have with kind of determining if the student is doing well or not?
So I would say with the iReady test that we do, it's done 3 times a year. So we do it at the end of every trimester. It could be done twice a year or 3 times a year. I tend to do it 3 times a year after the end of each trimester. We do have a writing assessment that we do at the end of each unit. And that's part of our Lucy Calkins writing program. So it's basically, there's guidelines and, there's rubrics as to how the test needs to be basically administered and how it needs to be scored as well. So we do that. So each curriculum has its own, I would say, assessment to it. But because I teach lower grades, right, we don't do that many, what we call, I think they would call it, I forgot, I don't know what they call it in Florida, but they call it here the SBAC. The SBAC test is one of those state tests that they do. So they only start doing them after once they reach 3rd grade. So any student below that, you won't be doing that CASP test, the SBAC test. So in that case, a lot of formative testing happens. And once again, formative basically means that it's not going to be standardized. It's not going to be like everybody's going to do that. It could be maybe a writing sample. It could be maybe looking at their homework a little bit, So there's many different ways that we assess our students, especially if we don't have that the SBAC test, that standardized test that happens in third grade. So to answer your question, is it enough? I guess in terms of the younger kids, the standardized tests, we would basically rely on maybe one test alone. And then as the grades get higher, there are more standardized tests that happen. So for us, it's just the iReady tests that we basically focus on the most.
So based on everything you said about data, about maybe a little bit lack of data, could be maybe some challenges you have to keep students within the schools after school, or students not being able to get enough support outside the school, like once they leave the school because parents are busy. So combining every struggle you mentioned, let's have some hypothetical questions. So what if outside the school, when they get back home, what if students can have free one-on-one tutoring whenever they want with more than 20 subjects of their choice outside the school? And what if once they get tutoring from different tutors, what if you as a teacher get reports, individualized reports from each student for each student about their progress based on the number of sessions they request or the topics they ask and the personalized feedback the tutors give? What if you have all of those resources and extra support on top of the things you have right now? What do you think it's going to be?
I think that'd be a wonderful tool for our students, especially our low-income students, the ones that I just talked about, the ones that don't really fall into that category where they can receive, free after school on campus, or maybe a paid after school. They don't have, the funds to go to a paid after school. So it's either one or the other. And then, if not, you're just going to have to go home on a school bus, or maybe grandparent or mom or dad are going to have to pick you up and take you home. And that's kind of where you got to figure everything out. In many cases, because parents are very busy, like I said, you're going to have somebody else try to help you. Aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa. And, they may not be aware of exactly what's going on in school. So to have that type of program free available to low income students and families, I think is a wonderful idea. I think parents ask me very carefully all the time, what can I do? How can I help my student? How can I help my child? We don't necessarily push tutoring because it's costly. It's a costly thing to do. Of course, some parents, they're able to afford it, so that's great. But many times parents aren't able to do that. So that's why they struggle. And we really don't want students to struggle at such a young age. We want to make sure that they can master all the foundational skills before third grade, because third grade is when things really start to get very serious. But so what I'm trying to say is it would be wonderful to have that sort of option to parents and say, and really let them know that, hey, this is available out there. Were you aware of this? And I can guarantee you a lot of people are not aware of that. And once again, that's because they're really busy. They're really busy. They're not sitting there scrolling through the internet, looking, for things, for options, what's available, because it's not easy. It's always a time issue. Another thing is, if teachers are basically given the option to see that data, that's great. And we're going back to that initial conversation of how Title I teachers work, is that we do a lot of data analysis. And we are basically pushed to do that. And that is definitely part of our job description. It's a huge part of our job description where we actually have to look at data and analyze and see who's falling behind, and then group them accordingly. And we have to see what type of resources or what type of programs or what type of interventions we can provide to these students. So any extra piece of data is considered to be very valuable. So that would be great if the teachers could receive that and also know what type of students are receiving, the online support, and basically being able to connect with the online support program and with the tutors. That would be wonderful.
At the beginning, I said it was a hypothetical question, but actually it's not. It's something that we, Uplift's crew, have been doing for a while. So we teamed up with this nonprofit named UpChief. It's a 24/7 one-on-one online tutoring platform for
Mhm.
low-income students. And I remember you mentioned the apps that Title I schools buy with the federal funding. And they do something like that as well. They provide partnership with Title I schools. Basically, the tutoring itself is already free. But what they do with that partnership is they send the staff members to the school, like in person, to have like an in-person session to teach kids. Because, when it comes to like online learning, accessibility is also really important. It needs to be really accessible to use the app. It needs to be really easy. So they send the staff members to teach kids how to use the tutoring platform, how to request sessions. They keep giving that ongoing support for students so they can stay on platform. So the students within that partnership program, they actually request sessions outside the school. Let's say they're not in a setting where they can get enough help from their parents or grandparents outside the school. They request sessions for their math homework, for their English homework, and there are thousands of tutors out there. So their sessions are picked up almost immediately. So on top of those support for students, also under that partnership, they also give teachers immense help with reports based on the number of sessions, students' requests, topics, the subjects. So they make this kind of like IEP individualized report for teachers, and they give some insights about students, how they're doing on top of the state exam. Additionally, they provide professional development sessions for teachers. So teachers can also easily instruct students to let them feel free to ask for help. And this is not the end. They also have student programs like fellowships, and for high schools, they have college prep boot camps. Yes, but it's not free partnership because they also have to like get those resources. And it usually costs around 2.5 to 2.6K to fund that partnership between Upchief, the nonprofit, and one Title I school. If the school already got all those programs and applications, sometimes they're not in a situation where they can just spend money for that partnership. It's a lot of money. That's why we started this fundraiser project, namely $5 for change, where we ask people for $5 and they donate, and then it adds up to 2.6K, so we can support one Title I school with more than 500 students. So that's
Mhm.
actually not the things I mentioned was not hypothetical at all. That is something we're making happen, and we're really excited for that.
Sounds like a very exciting program. And I really feel like there's so many different apps out there, but you gotta pay for them. And parents are very reluctant, especially if you are coming from a low income family. It's not easy. But I think if they know, right, that there is something like that available out there, I think they would be extremely happy. They'd be interested in knowing what that is. And I also feel like many schools out there, because like I said, 2/3 of the public and charter schools in the United States of America are Title I schools. And based on my experience, whether I taught in California or Florida, Title I school to Title I school, we see similarities. and we experience the same issues. So I think knowing that there's so many students and parents out there that need that support, and that your team is basically running this program and just trying to support our students out there, I think this is a wonderful project. And I think you guys are going to go very far with this. And I think if the word is out, there should be so many schools interested in possibly taking on this program and providing it to their students. So I think this is a wonderful cause, what you guys are doing right now.
Thank you very much. Well, that was it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us tonight with this wonderful event. And yeah, thank you again and have a good night.
My pleasure. I wish you guys all the best.